Chapter 6, The Accidental War Correspondent. It's 8:45 a.m. the next morning. I'm in my apartment at 666 Greenwich Street, wearing only a pair of white boxer shorts, debating whether or not to go into the office. I'm suffering from a mild stomach upset, probably caused by yesterday's 7-hour flight from London. I fear, however, that it might be more serious, gallbladder disease perhaps. I make a note to call Dr. Ruth. Above me to the northwest, an American Airlines Boeing 767, piloted by Islamic terrorist Mohammed Atta, is traveling at 470 miles per hour toward lower Manhattan at an estimated altitude of 2,000 feet. In the aircraft's coach-class cabin, Amy Sweeney, a flight attendant, is talking on a mobile phone to a colleague at Boston's Logan Airport. "I see water and buildings," she's saying in a low voice. "Oh my gosh, oh my gosh." At this point, the aircraft is probably now directly over 666 Greenwich Street, a mile and a half north of the World Trade Center and 1 block east of the Hudson River. In Boston, 216 miles northeast, Amy Sweeney's colleague is unaware that one of Mohammed Atta's suitcases is currently circling, unclaimed, on a baggage carousel only a few yards away from him. He doesn't know who Atta is, nor that the terrorist passed through Boston that morning after coming in on a connecting flight from Portland. Atta's suitcase contains airline uniforms, flight manuals, and a 4-page document in Arabic. It instructs him to, quote, "feel complete tranquility because the time between you and your marriage in heaven is very short," quote. President George W. Bush at this freeze-frame moment is 1,217 miles southwest of New York in Sarasota, Florida. He's in a motorcade on his way to a photo opportunity with a group of local school children. He intends to read them a story entitled "My Pet Goat." He has not yet been told by the Federal Aviation Administration, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, the National Military Command Center, the Pentagon, the White House, the Secret Service, or Canada's Strategic Command that at least one commercial aircraft has been hijacked. He is, in fact, remarkably ill-informed for the leader of the free world. In my apartment, I am also ill-informed. I return to bed, yawn, scratch, and then stare at the ceiling. As I lie there, another Boeing 767, this one operated by United Airlines, is diverted from Los Angeles to New York. The pilot doesn't know about the diversion because he is currently being murdered by one of Atta's fellow members of Al-Qaeda, an Afghanistan-based terror group. I list the arguments against going to the office. Number 1, Joanna Coles no longer works for the Times. She left yesterday after being offered a job at New York Magazine. That means a solitary lunch at 1211 Avenue of the Americas. Number 2, Joanna's replacement, Nicholas Wapshut, is currently on the deck of the QE2, probably 1,000 miles off the eastern seaboard, having decided to use a 100-year-old mode of transport to get to his new posting. That means no one will know I'm working from home. As I talk myself out of leaving the apartment, the Times' only other correspondent in New York, James Bone, is a mile southeast, finishing a cup of coffee at an Egyptian newsstand on Lower Broadway. He's late for work, but about to get the biggest front page of his career. The seconds and nanoseconds tick toward 8:46 a.m. Another aircraft, a Boeing 757, operated by United Airlines, idles its engines on the runway of New Jersey's Newark Airport, 16.5 miles southeast. The pilot, who has just received clearance for takeoff, is unaware that he has only 41 minutes left to live. He has never heard of Al-Qaeda or of Saudi billionaire Osama bin Laden. A passenger on the plane, Tom Beamer, has no idea that he is about to inspire a Neil Young song entitled "Let's Roll," or that his family will publish a book in his honor. I jump out of bed. I will go to the office. As I make this decision, another Boeing 757, operated by American Airlines, nears cruising altitude. It is 20 minutes into its journey from Washington Dulles to Los Angeles. The pilot of the plane has 9 minutes to live. The passengers have 52 minutes. The plane will not reach Los Angeles. It is now 8:46 a.m. Outside, I hear a distant crashing noise. The world changes. In an instant, my generation loses its war virginity, and I become a war correspondent. But I don't know any of this yet. I'm still worried about my gallbladder. I assume that the noise outside is the opening of the metal shutter of the kebab shop opposite my apartment. The shop is owned by an Iranian family. I can hear sirens now. The city winds into an echo chamber. Nothing unusual in that. There's a strange, acrid smell. I curse New York. I can see clear blue sky outside. It's hot for September. I put on my clothes, dark blue denim, a light blue work shirt, aviator sunglasses. I open the front door to my apartment and pick up the New York Times. The lead story is this. Arsenic standard for water is too lax, study says. I wonder if my gallbladder problem is in fact arsenic poisoning. In a few minutes, I won't care. I stepped onto the elevator at precisely 8:50 a.m. Down, I asked. Did you hear anything about the Trade Center? Came the unexpected reply from a middle-aged woman dressed head to heel in Prada. Her jaw was locked with worry as she gripped her Motorola phone. Me. No? I heard it on the radio. She said an explosion or something. My husband's there. He's not picking up. She stabbed at the Motorola. At first, the words Trade Center didn't mean anything to me. It was early after all, and I hadn't had my morning espresso. Yeah, I heard that too, said the gay investment banker next to me. By the end of the sentence, his voice has risen an octave. I think there's been an accident with an airplane, he speculated. Oh, man. I wondered if this was a news story. If so, I was in no position to cover it. I kept all my pens and spiral-bound notebooks at work. The Trade Center, quote-unquote, still didn't mean anything to me, even though I'd recently taken my parents to the observation deck on top of the South Tower. In fact, I had been invited to a party at the windows of the World Restaurant in the North Tower for Thursday. The invite was currently sitting on my kitchen table. Cocktails at 1,350 feet, it said. I needed coffee. My stomach ached. The elevator jerked to a halt. I strode past Walter and Carlos, the building's doormen, and out into the sunshine. I cursed as I realized I'd forgotten my dry cleaning. Then I searched for a cab, catching a glimpse of something unusual as I turned. I looked right toward the familiar view of downtown Manhattan, dominated by two gigantic silver towers, an inverted Bugs Bunny smile poking out of the gum of the skyline. That's the Trade Center, I scolded myself. The World Trade Center. But something was wrong. There was a black gash about 3/4 of the way up the North Tower and a trail of smoke coming from it. I could see an orange glow from deep within the hole. An accident, I thought. Probably an amateur pilot in a small plane. I remembered reading about the Army Air Corps B-25 bomber that had somehow managed to hit the side of the Empire State Building in 1945. A yellow cab pulled up beside me. Man, that pilot must have been on fucking crack to crash into something that big on a day like this, said the driver. Holy crap. I waved him away and called my friend Karen, who worked for Deutsche Bank somewhere within the Trade Center complex. Perhaps she would have the real story. No answer. She's probably late for work as usual. It didn't occur to me to be worried. I knew she was on a low floor. She complained about not having a view. Wearily, I called the business desk in London. Something has hit the World Trade Center, I said. There's a bloody great hole in it. I felt myself wanting to exaggerate, to sell the story. This could be a way of avoiding the office after all. But as I looked at the flames, I suspected I didn't need to embellish. Yeah, we've heard something about that, came the distant vague reply. Barrow was clearly knee-deep in mucky copy. Shall I take a look, I asked. Barrow, I'll put you over to Foreign. I immediately tensed. The Foreign News Desk represented the exotic, dangerous world outside of financial journalism. I heard 8 bars of Vivaldi, then another voice. It was posh and clipped. Chris? My name had a dip in it, signaling the need for information. Hi, yes, there's a hole in the World Trade Center, I coughed. Small plane, probably. I hope the sounded informed. We're watching it on Sky. Can you get down there? James Bone's already on his way. The voice was impatient, harried. There were probably much bigger stories to be worrying about, I thought. What with the arsenic and the water supply, this would probably make only a few hundred words. A photo story, perhaps. Maybe it would be a lead nib. I was good at those. Yes, I'm not far from... Good. The voice was distracted. Me, I'll call in later. I hung up, eager to cause the least possible inconvenience. In front of me, of course, was the biggest American news story since December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. I was young, ambitious, and After months of lift and view, desperate for what Linda Christmas called real journalism. So what did I do next? Run toward the flames? Hitch a ride on a passing fire truck? Jump into a cab and order the terrified driver to step on it? Alas, no. At 8:53 a.m. on Tuesday, September 11, 2001, I strolled back inside 666 Greenwich Street and took the elevator up to my apartment, where I collected some pens and hunted for a notebook. I congratulated myself on getting out of a day's work at the veal-fattening pen on 6th Avenue. I was ignorant, of course, of one crucial fact. The World Trade Center had been attacked before in 1993. The alleged bomber, Ramzi Mohammed Youssef, who had entered the U.S. with a fake Iraqi passport, was currently residing in the quote-unquote Supermax correctional facility in Florence, Colorado. Youssef was a close friend of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who at this moment was watching the burning North Tower from a bunker in Afghanistan. No doubt he was whooping, cheering, and doing whatever else terrorist chiefs do when they've successfully murdered a few thousand innocent men, women, and children. At home, I looked in the mirror and took some multivitamin tablets. Unable to find anything to write on, not even a napkin, I snatched the red, leather-bound diary that Alana had bought for me as a gift from Italy, along with my dry cleaning, and headed for the door. As an afterthought, I also grabbed my digital camera, which I jammed into my jeans pocket. It didn't occur to me that the fire in the World Trade Center would be the most photographed event in history. I thought the Times' picture desk might appreciate some amateur shots. By the time I staggered back out onto Greenwich Street, coat hangers in my teeth, a bag of laundry over my shoulder, and blankets and sweaters under my arm, it was 9:02 a.m. I checked the World Trade Center again. The burning had intensified. I reassured myself that I had plenty of time to get down there before my deadline. The truth, however, was that I was deliberately stalling. I was apprehensive about the prospect of having to interview real people instead of doing the usual lift and view. Part of me was tempted to go back upstairs and cover the story from CNN. Sweating, I ducked inside the dry cleaners, which was next door to 666 Greenwich Street, and dropped everything on the counter. The Asian shop owner, unable to pronounce or spell my second name, was struggling to label my clothes when I heard another distant crash. By the time I made it outside, there was another gash in the World Trade Center, this time in the South Tower. I looked again. I'm hallucinating, I told myself. I got Alana on speed dial. She was having breakfast with her father, who was visiting from Ohio. No, she hadn't seen the World Trade Center. Switch on the television, I told her, adrenaline now starting to feed through my nervous system, dissolving the grogginess. I had already forgotten about gallbladder disease and arsenic poisoning. Alana, who had an irritating but understandable habit of never believing anything I told her until she had independently verified it, sounded uninterested. I'm heading down there, I said, trying to sound brave. I wanted her to tell me, or better beg me, not to go down there. She didn't. Give you a call in a bit, I said. Enjoy breakfast. I hung up. I tried to call the foreign news desk, but it wouldn't connect. Karen's office number, meanwhile, just rang off the hook. Now I was worried. I jogged south, passing tables set up outdoors for voting in the mayoral elections. The winner would replace Mayor Rudy Giuliani, who was standing down after 2 controversial terms. There were people wearing sandwich boards with the names of candidates and campaign slogans stopped onto them. He has commercials, I have credentials, read one. Behind the campaigners, plumes of stinking black smoke were rolling out over the Hudson River. The sirens of emergency vehicles wailed hysterically. New York is deafening on a good day. Today it was unbearable. It was as though the city itself was howling. The campaigners and voting officials didn't seem to know what to do. They sat on their camping chairs and watched 2 steel volcanoes erupt less than a mile away. Later, much later, some of these same people would criticize President Bush for continuing to read My Pet Goat to the children in Florida, even after he had been told about the South Tower. Inaction, however, was an almost animal response, like rabbits caught on a 6-lane highway under a xenon glare. By this time, I was in Tribeca, an empty warehouse district that had been gentrified with white box lofts, furniture shops, and Robert De Niro's Mediterranean restaurant. There were pedestrians everywhere, all of them speed-walking north. It looked like 5th Avenue at the weekend. Then it hit me. The pedestrians were evacuees from the World Trade Center. There were hundreds, perhaps thousands of them. The men dressed in Italian pinstripes and Thomas Pink shirts. The women in smart pantsuits and low heels. They were possibly the world's best-dressed refugees. I stopped one of them, who told me his name was John Fratton. What happened? I asked. Was there an accident with a plane? John, a grandfatherly figure with thick gray hair, was agitated. This wasn't some two-bit propeller job from Teterboro Airport, he said, waving his arms at the burning towers. There were 2 jetliners. Jetliners! John wasn't looking at me as he spoke. It was as though he was trying to explain to himself what had just happened. The cop said the second one came in over the East River and then slam. He shook his head as if something was trapped inside. His pupils were pinpricks. For some reason, the word jetliner clicked. I thought of the silver tube of a Boeing 767 and the damage it would do to a skyscraper. It didn't occur to me that a Boeing 767 would also have nearly 24,000 gallons of jet fuel in its wings. I was, however, a little skeptical. Did John really know what he was talking about? There were plenty of amateur pilots, after all, who flew small private planes from Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. Surely it was possible that they could get their navigation so modeled that one could hit a 110-story building, but 2 planes into 2 buildings within minutes of each other on a clear and sunny September morning? Thank you, sir, I said, giving him a quizzical stare. John Fratton didn't look like an exaggerator. At this point, of course, I hadn't seen what the rest of the world had already watched live on CNN. United Airlines Flight 175 from Boston to Los Angeles, making an unscheduled stop between the 78th and 84th floors of the South Tower. The aircraft had seemed to twist as it cut into the building. As I continued jogging south, the refugees began to look more ragged. Some of them had specks of white dust on their business suits. The election officials, meanwhile, were starting to hurriedly pack up their tables. There was an overwhelming stench of what I assumed to be jet fuel, and something else. I stopped one of the evacuees. She seemed calm and together. She said her name was Diane Reek, and that she worked for American Express in the World Financial Center, 1 block north of the Twin Towers. I heard a big bang and then saw a huge red fireball, she told me, her hand over her face to shield it from the sun. Diane continued, but the worst was seeing the people jump, 3 or 4 from this side, 2 or 3 from the other. She pointed matter-of-factly to the inferno of the North Tower. I finished my jerky writing in longhand, and then began to process what Diane had just told me. What? There are people jumping? Diane didn't answer. Her face was suddenly awash with tears and mascara. A colleague held tightly onto her arm. Interview over, he said. It's now 9:45 a.m. This is what I don't know. The fire caused by the 24,000 gallons of jet fuel in the plane that hit the South Tower is weakening the steel core of the building. It will collapse in 20 minutes, nearly killing me. A total of 642 others will not survive, 18 of them on the ground, 618 above the impact zone, between the 78th and 84th floors, and 6 on the floors below. The North Tower, even though it was hit earlier than the South Tower, will take another 43 minutes to fall. A total of 1,466 will be killed, 1,356 of them at or above the impact zone between the 94th and 98th floors, and 100 below. This is what else I don't know. At 9:30 a.m., President Bush described the events in New York as, quote, an apparent terrorist attack, end quote. At 9:40 a.m., the Federal Aviation Administration grounded all flights in the U.S., and at 9:43 a.m., 213 miles southwest of Manhattan in Washington, D.C., an American Airlines Boeing 757 nosedived into the west side of the Pentagon. I also don't know, of course, that at this very moment, 2.6 miles northeast of the burning Pentagon, the White House is being evacuated. I have jogged from Tribeca to Murray Street, 3 blocks north of the World Trade Center. I'm facing sideways with the sun searing into my forehead. Beside me, there's a man sitting on the curb, his back to the inferno and his son on his lap. The boy, barely more than a toddler, is being shielded by his father's body from the unbearable horror behind him. The man is holding a book of nursery rhymes and reading into his son's ear, not once giving in to the temptation to glance over his shoulder. I wonder where the mother is. Then I look up at the flames. There's a police blockade in front of me. NYPD officers and FBI agents have gathered around their cars, watching helplessly. 4 burly and uniformed men are around one vehicle, thumping their fists on its roof and stifling sobs. They're listening to something on the police radio. "People don't see shit like this in wars," says one. A yellow school bus grunts eastward. Some of the cars on Murray Street have shunted into each other, a disaster movie visual cliche, as their drivers stare at the spectacle above. Already, the crowd on Murray Street has witnessed scores of people suffer one of the most wretched deaths imaginable. Here they come, black shapes writhing, turning, and grasping as they make the quarter-of-a-mile journey from the top floors of the World Trade Center to the concrete plaza below. They fall silently, the sirens scream for them. I tell myself they had passed out with shock, but why are they moving? Why do they seem to be clawing at the acres of glass? I remind myself that I have been to the observation deck of the South Tower 3 times. Each time I felt a chill of fear as the elevator doors revealed Manhattan and New York Harbor as if viewed from space. I remember the sickly sensation of the building swaying in the wind. I also remember reading that the 1,350-foot towers swing a few feet every 10 seconds, their giddy movements counterbalanced by gigantic steel pendulums in the center of each structure. The last time I was up there, I wanted to be back on the ground immediately. The elevator operator cracks stupid jokes all the way down. I wonder if he's one of the terrible black shapes. Now they're falling in clusters. 2 of them appear to be holding hands before gravity takes over. I glimpse a flapping necktie. The cloudless blue sky makes for perfect viewing conditions. Someone in the crowd says he has just escaped from the building. He says he saw bodies in the treetops. The clutter of the skyline makes it impossible to see where or how the black shapes land. Then a terrible thought strikes me. The human shrapnel must be deadly for those trying to evacuate the building. Again, I think of Karen. The plaza itself must be a vision of hell. I hope she was late for work. The crowd gasps, sweeps, and whoops as the human confetti continues. Every so often a bystander falls to the ground, shaking and praying, unable to watch anymore. This happens to me after perhaps a 6th faller. I'm a godless soul, but praying seems appropriate. I'm willing to try anything to help the poor bastards falling from the building. At first it seems inexplicable why they would choose to jump. Then comes the slow realization. The furnace of burning jet fuel, the charred skin, the toxic fumes, and then the conclusion that there is no choice at all. There is a helicopter hovering close to the mast on the South Tower. I wait for it to land on the roof, but it backs away in circles. Some trapped office workers are waving brightly colored rags out of shattered windows. The fuck are they doing, man? Someone next to me shouts at the retreating helicopter. Why don't they land on the roof and save them? No one is able to supply an answer. And then it starts to happen. There is a crunch, a boom, and the sound of several thousand windows exploding. A section of the North Tower comes loose, like a melted ice shelf falling into the ocean. The impact creates a wave of debris that crashes through the streets, channeling itself between buildings and sweeping pedestrians off their feet. Then comes a terrible realization. It's heading for Murray Street. For the first time in my life, I experience mass hysteria. Everyone starts to run. Head down, my notebook in one hand, camera in the other, I sprint northwest toward an apartment complex near Chambers Street. I stop noticing other people. I find an enclosed square and a doorway facing north, away from the collapsing building. There are perhaps 10 of us in the doorway. We look at each other but say nothing. The smoke clears, we're okay. I jog east toward Chambers Street meets the West Side Highway. I walk slowly backward up the highway, staring at the disintegrating skyscraper ahead of me. Then a police officer shouts something. There's a loud pop. Did someone fire a gun? Then another crunch. Another boom. This time much, much louder. I'm thinking of the man sitting on the curb with his son. I'm running again. I didn't stop running until I was about halfway up the West Side Highway. Only then did I dare turn around to confirm what had caused the seismic boom behind me. The South Tower of the World Trade Center had disappeared. In its place was an acrid mushroom cloud, slowly billowing northward and upward. Black ink spilled on a blue canvas. I wondered what had happened to the police officer who screamed at the crowd to move. could have sworn I heard him fire his pistol into the air. I concluded that the people only a few yards behind me as I ran north must have been killed. At one point when I looked over my shoulder, I saw them being sucked into the wall of smoke. There were, however, some survivors, their suits ripped and matted with dust. They ran, walked, and stumbled north, occasionally pausing to throw up in the gutter or spit out gobs of filth. None of us had even thought about what would happen if one of those 110-story towers collapsed. After all, the Empire State Building hadn't keeled over after the B-25 hit it back in 1945. You bloody idiot, I thought to myself. What were you thinking? But I wasn't thinking, I was watching. I had turned east onto the cobbled part of Greenwich Street, and then north again, back up toward my apartment building. By the time I got to the massive UPS warehouse on the border of Tribeca and the West Village, the throng had stopped and turned to look at the burning North Tower. A brown UPS truck, its doors and windows wide open, had parked in the middle of the street and cranked up the radio in its cab to full volume. A hot dog seller who had presumably wheeled his rusty car all the way up from the financial district was offering snacks. There were curses of disbelief as the K-Rock DJ, who had stopped playing back-to-back Led Zeppelin for probably the first time in his career, declared that the Pentagon had also been hit by an airliner and that another aircraft had come down in Pennsylvania. "This is fucking World War III, shouted a teenager on a skateboard. At that moment, the North Tower fell, all 1,350 feet of it sucked into the bedrock of southern Manhattan. Each tower, I later learned, created 900,000 tons of rubble when it fell, and each Boeing 767 released 1 kiloton of raw energy, the equivalent of 1,000 tons of TNT, or a 20th of the power of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima when it hit the World Trade Center. The scale of the destruction, it seemed, could be described using only the metrics of nuclear Armageddon. So, there I stood on Greenwich Street watching a 110-story skyscraper being razed for the second time in one morning. It was then I realized that this was a deliberate act of cruelty, not a freak double accident. Perhaps I thought this is the beginning of the end for the war virgins. Perhaps our adrenal glands weren't malfunctioning. They were trying to tell us something all along. But who would want to vandalize the world's most famous skyline? What could they hope to achieve? I felt my first flash of anger. Only one name seemed obvious: Saddam Hussein. I thought of President George W. Bush, and I thought of his father, President George H.W. Bush, and I thought of the inevitable revenge ahead. There is a war coming, I told myself, and this time it won't be over in 5 days. My only comfort out there in the ash and the smoke was that wherever the war was declared, I wouldn't be there to cover it. Little, of course, did I know. I got back to 666 Greenwich Street sometime before noon. Deadline seemed like an abstract concept after what had just happened. Even now, I can't remember the final steps into my apartment. Did I say anything to Walter and Carlos at the door? Was there anyone in the elevator with me? My memory resumes its narrative with me trying to call the foreign desk, then Alana with no success. The mobile phone masts had jammed with 21 million New Yorkers calling their mothers. Instead, I emailed. Luckily, my internet service was still working. It was hooked up via cable, not through the dead phone line. This is what I sent to Barrow. Subject: hell. Must say the whole thing has been traumatic. Not only do I have a friend who works there, parentheses, can't contact her, but I also sat and watched at least 20 people jump out of the WTC from the top floors because they were being burned alive. I stayed as long as I dared, but when the first tower collapsed and a huge mushroom cloud engulfed the financial center, I'm afraid to say that I legged it as fast as I could. I'm not going anywhere near the financial district again. Too dangerous. In hindsight, those final 2 sentences were probably not the best way to begin a career as a war correspondent. Legging it, after all, is not what the war correspondents do. They hold fast, stand firm, head back into the action. The email did, however, establish a theme for my later work. I also emailed Alana and Glenn. I told Glenn to call my mother. She would have assumed the worst. Finally, I emailed Karen. Subject: okay. Are you okay? I imagined the message pinging into the inbox of her computer buried beneath 1,800,000 tons of melted steel and plastic. Perhaps she'd be able to access her work email account remotely, I thought. I remembered that she used to carry a Palm Pilot around with her. After clicking on send, I noticed I had a new message. It was highlighted with a cheerful yellow envelope icon. The email was from the foreign desk. Subject, blank. 1,000 words please on I saw people fall to death, etc. I felt a twist of anger at the almost comic insensitivity of the email. Fuck you, I mouthed at the screen of my laptop. Part of me, however, felt pleased with the request. To the foreign desk, I was a dull, egghead business reporter, and a young and inexperienced one at that, not a trusted quote-unquote color writer. The rest of me, however, felt disgusted at the thought of using the trade center's destruction as a career opportunity. Nevertheless, I could only imagine the agony of Wapshot and having to watch or listen to reports of the destruction in New York and elsewhere from the QE2. I wondered if the cruise liner was even within range of satellite television. My most pressing concern, however, was that I was in shock and unable to summon a single emotion, never mind a pleasing turn of phrase. The final deadline for the first edition was in about 2 hours, meaning I would have to file my 1,000-word piece within an hour to guarantee it a place in the newspaper. I got up, washed my face, and spat dust and phlegm into the kitchen sink. Then, somewhat belatedly, I threw up. Next to my laptop was the red leather-bound diary I grabbed before running toward the World Trade Center. I opened it up. On the first page I had unimaginatively scrawled Independence Day, a reference to the Hollywood film. I felt a shudder of incompetence, not the first of the day. My notes ended with a quote from a random bystander. Dude, there's no way that tower will collapse. I sat on my cheap, pretend leather chair and stared at my laptop's postage stamp screen. Behind me was the only window in my apartment. I stared harder at the LCD and felt lightheaded with anxiety, as though the morning's terror had dissolved the sugar in my blood. I jiggled my feet in an effort to revive myself. Then I typed. At first, we thought it was burning debris falling from the upper floors of the World Trade Center. Then we noticed the debris had arms and legs. By 1 p.m. it was done. 20 years ago, the deadline would have come and gone. I would probably have been frantically jogging uptown in search of a working telephone, into which I could cough a few lines from my notebook. Perhaps my story would have made it into the following week's newspaper. I tried to watch television, but kept being distracted by an unusual noise. It sounded like distant cheering. Not constant, but in irregular bursts. I heard air horns and applause, like in a ticker tape parade. For the second time in a few hours, I thought it was hallucinating. There it was again. I stood on my windowsill, cupped my hands against the filthy glass, and tried to see what was going on. Nothing, just an empty street, trees, and that awful smoke. I grabbed my keys and headed for the elevator. Outside, as I reached the corner of Christopher and Greenwich Streets, the noise came again, louder. Then I saw where it was coming from. On either side of the West Side Highway was a crowd of perhaps 200 people, waving American flags and holding placards with Our Heroes and God Bless America painted on them. As the ambulances and fire engines hurtled south down the highway toward the mouth of hell, the crowd cheered, hooted, and wiggled the signs. I felt a sudden and unexpected swell of patriotism for a foreign country. There was no traffic going in the opposite direction. The vehicles blasted their horns. Their occupants, I noticed, looked more like soldiers than emergency workers. Some of them raised their fists and shook them in defiance. Others just waved. The rest, faced and sipping sticky energy drinks, stared blankly at the missing Manhattan skyline. Perhaps, like me, they felt angry. Later, my mobile phone managed to connect for the first time since 9 a.m. I talked to my dad, who told me I was lucky to have witnessed such a historic event. I could tell, however, that he was just trying to find something positive to say. He was also trying to hide the fact that he was hugely relieved. My mother said that she and my sister had cried all day. I spoke briefly to Alana, who was still with her own dad. She said she would come over to the apartment later. Then I got through to James Bowen, who had written the day's lead story. I found his cheery tone both hugely reassuring and unbearably irritating. This reminds me of Afghanistan, he said casually. Bowen, of course, was a real war correspondent. He hadn't liked it. After another few restless hours in the apartment, I decided to take a walk, but there was a police blockade at 14th Street. No one without ID was being allowed in or out. On my way home, I saw a Vietnam veteran draped in an Old Glory flag standing on the corner of 7th and West 13th. He was shouting, crying, pleading. I made out something about God and the fucking Arabs, but his words didn't form coherent sentences. It didn't matter. Words had been put out of business on this particular day. I headed south and the terrible fog thickened. My walk broke into a run. A light rain of ash made my contact lenses sting. American flags were draped over the brownstone buildings on Charles Street. Christ, I thought, I'm in a foreign country in a time of war. The U.S. had never really felt foreign to me. It did now. The same thought had clearly struck others. A Muslim cab driver who had probably escaped his own war-torn country to come to New York was buying an I Love the USA bumper sticker from the Asian-owned newsstand on Hudson Street and West 10th. He wouldn't look me in the eye. The Italian restaurant on Christopher and Washington Streets had wrapped its outdoor tables in plastic and put its winter snow canopy over the front door. But there were still people inside, eating and drinking, as ash rained against the windows. It seemed odd to order pasta and swig Chianti with a blazing mass grave only a dozen or so blocks away. But then, what else were we supposed to do? Sit at home, sober and hungry, waiting for the next jetliner to hit? I ducked into my monolithic red brick apartment building and felt relieved to be inside. Back in the apartment, I logged on to the Times' website. I couldn't stand another second of television. It was about 3 a.m. in London, and the first of tomorrow's articles were going online. The September 12th edition was turning out to be an almost unbearable mix of the world as it was and the world as it had become. Clingfilm attack lover jailed for 5 years was next to. She sat at her desk and watched an airliner flying straight at her. I skimmed through several other articles, all probably written before lunchtime on Tuesday in London, but developed a fixation with a single item halfway down the nib column. It read, "Some like it hot. Thousands of volunteers from the Women's Institute and Women's Royal Voluntary Service have knitted the world's longest scarf, 22 miles. The scarf, which would cover 2 football pitches if laid out, took 5 years to make and involved 500 million stitches." How long would it be, I asked myself, before another story like this makes it into the Times? Weeks, months, years? It's 11 p.m. I'm lying on my mattress, sweating and tangled in the blue cotton sheets, waiting for Alana to arrive. I would phone, but the phones don't work. Nothing bloody works apart from cable television. All 897 channels have become one, the Terror Channel. I don't want to watch it, not again, not ever. My apartment looks much the same as it did yesterday. Nothing else does. Outside there are pedestrians wearing gas masks. The amber fuzz of the street lamps through the terrible stinking fog makes Manhattan look like Victorian London. The fog, with all the microscopic particles of horror within it, is being carried up by the wind tunnel of Greenwich Street from downtown, which has today been renamed Ground Zero by the news networks. That apparently is what scientists used to call the impact zone of a thermonuclear bomb. Perhaps, as a skateboarder said, this is World War III. Today, Manhattan became a target in a war no one knew had been declared, and today I became an accidental war correspondent. I can't get the smell out of my clothes, and the NYPD officer's words are still trapped in my head. Get the fuck out of here! His handgun was raised and his face was stretched and twisted into a drenched mask of panic. But his scream was silenced by a tsunami of smoke and debris crashing toward Chambers Street. "How do you know it's over?" he mouthed. "Go home, go home." There was a gunshot, or perhaps the sound of steel and glass hitting concrete, and then the simultaneous realization of several hundred people that they were about to die. That was when the running started. I keep having to wash my face and spit gobs of grit and dust and knows what else into the sink. I snapped and bought a carton of cigarettes an hour or so ago. Cancer can try as hard as it wants, but it's not going to scare any New Yorkers today. Let's see if civilization survives tomorrow first. Then the cigarette smokers can start worrying about their ruined lungs. Still no word from Karen. I reflexively dial her home and mobile numbers, but it can't or won't connect. I call her office again and listen to a cheerful recorded voice telling me the number's temporarily unavailable. How about permanently unavailable, I think, along with an entire zip code of southern Manhattan? I imagine Karen's melted desk in the Inferno still blazing less than a mile and a half from my bed. From Greenwich Street, the floodlights erected by the rescue workers look like a distant rip in the space-time continuum, a blinding white doorway to another dimension. Even from this distance, I can hear the groans of the machinery. Karen would probably have been late for work, I reassure myself. She always was. Is. Alana is on her way from Midtown, 40th and Lexington. It's close to Grand Central. I hope she's okay. Maybe that'll be next. It's hard not to speculate. I haven't seen her since I left for England 2 weeks ago. I can barely believe I landed at John F. Kennedy Airport last night. Alana must be walking or taking the subway. The cab drivers have all gone home, and who can blame them? Who want to be an Iranian or Afghan, prayer beads hanging from the rearview mirror, the Holy Quran in the passenger seat, picking up angry Americans on the streets of Manhattan at night? There's a gospel song playing on the clock radio next to my bed. I keep on falling, goes the lyric. The bass notes make the radio's casing rattle. I close my eyes and think of black shadows against blue sky and reflective glass.